Come all you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old union has come in here to dwell.
A battle in the heart of Alabama caught our attention. Coal miners in one community, they've been on strike now for months.
Working as long as 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, in some of the most dangerous conditions.
I really think that the labor movement is the single greatest force for democracy in the history of the United States.
The story of Alabama is a story of not just resilience, but of militancy.
I say no contract, you say no code. No contract, no contract.
If we ain't all free, ain't none of us free.
You're listening to Alabama's only union talk radio show, The Valley Labor Report, with Adam Keller and Jacob Morrison.
Hello, Tennessee Valley. This is the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison. My co-host and fellow agitator is Adam Keller, and we are broadcasting live from the heart of the Tennessee Valley here in the Spice Radio studios in Huntsville, Alabama. Today, we've got a good show for you today. Alabama politicians want to microchip parolees. We're going to be getting an update on the prisons from Alabama political reporters John Glenn. We'll be talking about why Huntsville City school bus drivers unionized with the Teamsters, and a lot more. And we'll be taking your calls, folks. If you want to be part of the program today, we've got a phone number, and the line is open. The line is open. We are not as busy this weekend as we have been for the last few weeks when we've had to have the lines off. So this is the week to get your call in, folks. The phone number is 844-899-TVLR. That is 844-899-8857. You can also send us a text, and you can also send us a text and leave us a voicemail all throughout the week. If you haven't gotten enough of us by the time that we wrap here on the radio, or if you just want to see what we're up to throughout the week, then you can find us anywhere you find anything online, but in particular on our website, TVLR.fm, folks. We are coming out with new content every single day on our website. Not only are we now also putting our clips into written form, doing a short little write-up about some of our clips, we're also coming out with new articles on our website every single day, folks. Every single day, Monday through Thursday, we have at least one new article that is not something that was on the show. So really cool stuff. It's a lot of cool stuff coming out. Original reporting, analysis, and stuff like that. In next week, we're going to be running an op-ed about education from an Alabama history teacher, from a rank-and-file Alabama history teacher, and we love to do stuff like that. So definitely check out our website, bookmark our website, tvlr.fm, and become a subscriber to our daily newsletter. We send out, because we're putting out so much stuff, folks, we want a way to get all of it to you every day. And so we have a daily newsletter, Monday through Thursday. You can have in your inbox all of the new stuff that we released that day. And you can sign up to that newsletter, tvlr.fm/contact. Just make a note in the message form. Hey, I want to be on the daily newsletter. And we'll get you on it, folks. That'll also automatically put you on the weekly newsletter that comes out on Thursdays. I'm giving you kind of a weekly recap. But if you just want to be on the weekly newsletter, then tvlr.fm/contact, and make a note in the message box saying daily, a bit much for me, but give me something once a week. And we'll get that taken care of for you, folks. You can also find us, obviously, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, TikTok, all at the Valley Labor Report. Just a reminder, your support helps us stay on the air. Our largest single source of funding comes directly from our listeners. So if you want to become a sustaining donor of the program, then you can go to our website, tvlr.fm/donate, and set up an auto recurring donation. That really, really helps us out. The more that we have, the more sustainable the thing is in the long term. You can also buy our merch. Pre-orders are over for the Good Things design at this point, but we did order about 20 extra. We ordered about 20 extras, so you can go to our store, tvlr.fm/store, and see if we ordered any extra in your size, and go ahead and place that order. And we have one Join a Union shirt left that we've had that for months. It's red and it's large, and it's on our store as well. So if you want to get the last one, then go ahead and get it, and I'll send it to you this week. We also have 2 more hats, 2 more of the Union's Good Thing graph hats. They're pretty cool. Trucker hats. You can also become a patron at patreon.com/The Valley Labor Report. If you're a member of a union, then definitely think about getting your local to sponsor the show. Your local, your international, your regional federation, anything like that. Think about getting those organizations to sponsor the show. We are always available to speak to any of these bodies if they have any questions, or if you're having an annual or a semi-annual or whatever, like some kind of conference or convention or a training session that's regional that we could go to, we'd be more than happy to go and do like a little presentation in front of, several of the locals. In fact, we have been invited to a couple of different things along those lines in June and July of this year. So we're really looking forward to that.
Oh, yeah.
And it's going to be a lot of fun. So if your local members have questions for us, if, you think that people at a convention might be interested in learning more about the show and how they can support and how they can tune in, a lot of, surprisingly, there are still some people in unions in Alabama that maybe don't know about us. So,
not yet.
Yeah, not yet. Right. So always welcome any of those opportunities. And also if you're a teacher, particularly a history teacher, because that's kind of how it gets relevant, history and social studies, we would be willing to come talk to your class about unions and the history of unions. And we would be willing, and if you're a tech teacher, we would be willing to talk to your students, obviously, but we would also be willing to facilitate conversations and presentations from people that might be more relevant to your tech students, right? So if you have a tech class and, your students are interested in ironworking, well, they should really get hooked up with the Ironworkers Union as opposed to go and working for some podunk local contractor that's not going to pay him any benefits, that's going to pay him half of the wage rate as the Ironworkers Union, that's not going to give him health care, all this stuff. They should really get hooked up with the Ironworkers Union. And so we can hook you up with the business manager from the Ironworkers Local Union 477, sponsor the show. And he would come and give a presentation to your tech class about the benefits of trade unions and how to join them and how the apprenticeship program works. I kind of went on a tangent, but just want to let folks know that we are available to be a resource and as a conduit to other resources.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's not just your union, but if you have an organization you belong to, a community group, a political organization, and y'all are interested in learning more about unions, hit us up. We'd be happy to talk with y'all. Of course, we'd love to talk about the show and how the show can be beneficial, but about unions in general. Always happy to do that. And let me add our usual disclaimer that any viewpoints or opinions expressed today in this program belong solely to their author and do not necessarily represent any organization or sponsor. My legal advocate hat comes on, and I have to say that every episode. We do welcome all of our listeners, whether you're on YouTube, Facebook, WVNN, WZZA, WHIV, or through your favorite podcast app. We're proud to be part of the Labor Radio Podcast Network and encourage all of our listeners to check that out. And finally, for me, as most of you know, we're not media professionals. We're just a few diehard unionists who believe that Alabama and the South's labor movement and working class deserve a bigger platform. We're hoping this project can make a difference on that front, and we could not do it without you. So we want to thank everyone for tuning in. Whether you're a loyal fan or a first-time listener, we really appreciate you spending some time with us.
Absolutely. So we are one of the big stories here locally is that the Huntsville City School Bus drivers just unionized in a huge way, bigly, as some might say, with the Teamsters, Local 402. They won an election on March the 8th, 131-6. Super blowout. We've been able to talk to some of the couple of school bus drivers and the Teamsters business agent, Joe Gronick, in the last week or so about the win, and they've been able to kind of shed some light on how that happened. And, one of the really big things is that so there are kind of two parts to it. Some of the push towards unionization and a lack of and then there's also like a lack of there was a lack of an anti-union campaign from the company, which I think, is obviously important. And so the first thing is, like a lot of folks, these school bus drivers they didn't feel like they made enough money. They work 30 hours a week on average, according to a school bus driver, Liz Smith, that we talked to. 30 hours a week on average, and they make $20 an hour. And they can tell that is below market rate because other school bus drivers' salaries are public, because other school bus drivers are public employees, right? As opposed to in Huntsville City, they've contracted this service out, and but other cities haven't done that. And so they can look just a little bit outside of Huntsville City school limits, and they can see that the Madison City school bus drivers make $23 an hour, a full $3 an hour more than Huntsville City school bus drivers. And then on top of that, the Huntsville City school bus drivers don't get any benefits. They don't have like healthcare or retirement or any of that kind of stuff that you would expect an actual, a career to give you.
Right. I mean, Madison City, those are public school employees, so they have access to the retirement system of Alabama. That's a defined benefit pension. They have access to health care through PHIP, the Public Education Employees Health Insurance Program, right? And they have the due process rights that come with the Students First Act. There's a lot there that's missing when you are contracted out.
And in addition to school bus drivers only making $20 an hour, they have apparently, and I wasn't aware of this, but I guess maybe this is a thing that was around when I was going to school, but they have bus monitors on school buses, on some school buses, particularly when there are like special needs bus routes, they have bus monitors, but then apparently there are some bus monitors on non-special needs bus routes.
It can be a discipline challenge on a full bus sometimes.
Right. And the bus monitor, and I was confused. They said bus monitor. I was like, I don't even know. What are you talking about? What does that mean? And it's like a disciplinary role. Right.
Yeah, another adult on the bus to monitor the children.
That isn't,
driving.
Commandeering a however many ton vehicle with 70 lives, right? Somebody who's just dedicated to like watching the kids, basically.
Right. Which is very, very important. If you could only imagine the stress of driving a school bus through traffic, and then there's dozens and dozens of kids, and what if they don't all behave perfectly like little angels?
Right.
That may happen a time or two.
Yeah, and bus monitors, and particularly, and it's not only the disciplinary issues, but on the special needs, but like there are needs that have to be, there is care that has to be given there.
Health and safety is very critical there.
And the bus monitors only make $13 an hour.
Ooh.
And the driver trainers, they still only make $20 an hour, even though they can work sometimes as much as 60 hours a week. And they still don't have benefits. So, there are lots of reasons there that makes it difficult. And Liz, the school bus driver that I talked to mainly, she said that she was, that she, before the campaign actually started, she was kind of looking towards other employment because she would like to be able to stay as a school bus driver, but the compensation is just not enough to keep you around. And that totally makes sense. But she's excited now because she's thinking that hopefully with the union that being unionized, that they'll be able to get more and they'll be able to they'll be able to make a decent living, and that's important. And so that's part of it. Is like the wages and the benefits, and that's super common thing. And then there's also the thing about how this company, unlike so many other companies, they did not unleash a huge anti-union campaign, which is important.
Right. They did the right, decent thing.
Yeah. And now, to be fair, they didn't do the right, decent thing. I mean, I don't know. Maybe the official position of the union is that they did the right, decent thing. But my position as a commentary, not as a representative of the Teamsters or anything like that, but my analysis would be that they didn't do that because the First Student, the company that owns this contract service, it's not because they're so great and whatever. It's because they have a national contract with the Teamsters. The Teamsters represents First Student bus drivers across the country, and they have a national contract setting up, wages and benefits and stuff like this. But they also, in the contract, there is a neutrality clause that says that they legally can't. Like it would be a breach of contract for them to go on an anti-union rampage in a union campaign, and so. Because of the power that school bus drivers have been across the country, First Student school bus drivers have been able to amass, they have been able to bend the company, and kind of handcuff them, tie their hands behind their back in the case of these other union campaigns and say like, no, you can't. We're not going to allow you to do that, and we're willing to fight for that to be in our contract. And so that's a really good thing, and that that's shows that winning kind of begets more winning, right?
Right. Yeah, I think that's very accurate. And the thing is, like, it's not as if the company is restricted in any real practical way. What it is that they are basically required to do the right thing, which is to stay out of it, to be neutral, to let the employees have their choice. And they actually, First Student actually put out a statement about the campaign, and they said, quote, "First Student has a freedom of association policy that supports our commitment to our employees and their individual right to choose whether or not they want to join a labor union. We have no conflict with our drivers organizing. We have a strong relationship with the Teamsters, which includes a national master agreement. First Student contracts with both unionized and non-unionized teams, and our safety and reliability standards are equally high." So, I like you. I don't want to give like too much credit to any company, because ultimately, as you said, this is a testament to the power of the Teamsters organizing nationwide. But that's what you want to see, and so I do applaud First Student for doing what they're supposed to do. Because companies frequently don't. And so I do applaud them for that, and I hope that bodes well for the future.
And the fact that the Teamsters have a national agreement with this company already, because one of the anti-union arguments traditionally is like, oh, you don't know what's going to happen, but they have this national contract, and the national contract sets out higher standards than they're working under. And so, it's like, there's
a no-brainer.
It's really a no-brainer, right? You're almost guaranteed, it's not a guarantee necessarily, but it's almost a guarantee that these school bus drivers are going to have better wages and better benefits going forward, because the company's already agreed to better wages and benefits with the Teamsters before. And so why wouldn't they do it here? There's no reason to believe they're not going to do it here. So Joe Gronick told Fox News 54 in an interview with them that they have a meeting coming up in the very near future with workers to have discussions in regards to what's going to be negotiated in their labor agreement. And so we look forward to continuing reporting on that, seeing if there's anything in particular that these drivers are interested in fighting for that isn't in the national agreement, or how they're going to, just what their specific needs are and how negotiations are going to play out. So It's going to be. I'm looking forward to seeing how it develops, but I don't anticipate. I don't anticipate that this is going to be really a knockdown, drag-out fight. I think that we're going to have the bus drivers are going to have negotiations, and I think that they're going to be able to get a lot of what they're interested in getting, and it's going to be a something that both sides can at least be happy with or be content with. So
and I think it's so important that nearly 200 bus drivers right here in our community, their lives have changed for the better. And they are now a part of something bigger than themselves. And that's just, that's fantastic news. And that's why we're so excited about it. And we really appreciate Teamsters 402 for going for it. We appreciate these bus drivers, the 131 who crushed it in this election. That is just amazing. And
one of the Liz, the bus driver that I've spoken to most, she came to our the Labor Council's Thirsty Friday event last night, our little happy hour event that we do every now and then, and she had a shirt that was a Teamster shirt, and it said "The wheels on the bus go Union now." So that was,
hell yeah. I noticed that shirt. That was awesome. I love it.
Yeah, I got to get my hands on it.
Yeah,
I got to talk to Joe.
So it's just I've got to say, as a parent of a school-aged child, that I personally feel much better if the school bus drivers have benefits.
Right.
If they have protections. If they are treated like professionals with dignity and respect. Right? That is such an important job. Those of us with education background know how important and how difficult that job is. So all power to the bus drivers here in Huntsville. Congratulations on your union. Congratulations on the contract that is sure to come. And keep us posted on this. We love to see it.
Absolutely. So, phone number is 844-899-TVLR if you want to add a comment, ask a question, anything like that. This next story is really, really wild stuff here, and that is the Alabama politicians want to microchip parolees, which is just wild. And so I'm going to back up and I'm going to explain the situation, how this came to be. So this came to be because Representative Prince Chestnut, a Democrat, pre-filed a bill. And so, he was so interested in this legislation that he's putting forward that he wants to make sure that it gets in, kind of front of the line thing. I'm going to file it before the session even starts. And the bill was to disallow. Well, let's let him explain. Let's play this clip and have him explain what the bill does.
All right, sure. Let's pull this up here.
This bill is a bill that seeks to ban microchipping of employees by employers within the state of Alabama.
Okay. So,
Fair enough.
Fair enough. I guess as a union member, as a union activist, I am all for more freedom for employees, and I think that includes the freedom to not be microchipped by your employer.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I'm all for this legislation. If I was in the legislature, I would vote for this legislation as he said it. We're going to get to a change that came. But, it seems it's kind of weird. It's weird, and let's because the question is this actually an issue? And so let's let him answer that question, because that question was asked in this hearing where he presented the bill, and so he answers it. So let's see what he says.
I'm not going to ask you about companies, but is there any industries that are microchipping employees in Alabama now?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. Not that I'm aware of. Okay. So, a proactive measure seems kind of silly, but fine. I'm happy to be proactive. I would vote for that.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I get that it's a problem that doesn't really exist yet. but at the same time,
But it would be a problem if it existed. It would be bad if it existed.
And
right?
frankly, I mean, it's not that often that Alabama politicians are like proactive in protecting, especially protecting employees. So,
right.
I don't want to hate on
No.
Prince Chestnut. I do appreciate what he's doing.
Yeah. And I think, and later on in the hearing, and I didn't clip this, but maybe I should have, but later on in the hearing, somebody asked him about, because there was another person that kind of recognized like that this is maybe a little bit silly. And so he was like, all right, so, you've got this thing about microchipping. Are you, is your next bill going to deal with AI? And he was like, and everybody started laughing. And then Prince Chestnut was like, yeah, well, I've been reading some stuff and it does concern me. So, maybe.
Maybe.
and I mean, sure. I'm fine with that.
So Prince is our designated, like,
technology guy.
Yeah, future employment problems.
Yes.
Point man.
Yes. And so, but the thing here is that this is, even though it's not a problem, it would be such a gross violation of liberty and personal and bodily autonomy that we just want to be proactive against this heinous potential imaginary problem. We're going to say it's illegal. It's illegal for an employer to require an employee to be microchipped as a condition of employment. That's what this bill would do. Because that would be so, even though it's not happening, even though he doesn't have a single instance of this happening in Alabama, it's such a heinous thing. We just want to nip this in the bud, put the kibosh on it. We're not going to do it. And so in response to this preemptive nipping in the bud of a heinous, really diabolical proposition, a Republican says, well, sure, maybe employers shouldn't do it, but maybe the state should be able to do it. Let's play this clip.
I want us to monitor inmates when they're released. If the Board of Pardon and Parole comes up with a methodology by which they implant a chip as opposed to a monitoring bracelet, I want them to be allowed to do that.
And allow them to do that, he is trying to do. So that bill was officially amended to allow the Alabama Board of Pardon and Parolees to microchip people under their stewardship with no backlash. The Prince Chestnut was like, yeah, sure, that's a fine amendment. I'm fine with that. This is the guy that's like, and just a reminder, obviously the employment relationship is coercive. If you're an adult, you recognize that to a certain extent. It is coercive to an extent, right? Because you have to work to live. You have to work to eat. In our society, you have to work for a capitalist and you have to earn a wage. That's how you survive. And so to a certain extent, that relationship is coercive, because if you don't, you die, is the ultimate kind of finality, the conclusion of that logic, right? But the thing that conservatives will say, the free market people will say, is that, it's not really coercive because you can just go work for a different capitalist. And so it's...
Or you can become a capitalist yourself.
Or you can become a capitalist yourself.
Easier
right.
said than done, but yeah, you could go become a boss yourself and have other people in a subordinate relationship.
Right. And so, that's the thing that they say, but it is not, it's not thought terminating. It doesn't make the employment relationship not coercive. It just, but there is a certain reality there that, it's not exactly like you're a slave, right? You are not literally a chattel slave. But that's not the case when you are a ward of the state. When you have been arrested and right? You are literally, like, the 13th Amendment allows for slavery for punishment of a crime. You are literally, in certain terms, a slave to the state. at the whim of their dictates. And so the idea that we would allow the state to modify our person is totally Orwellian. It's totally Orwellian, and that is what, to the credit of the person in charge of the Board of Pardon and Parolees, Cam Ward. I talked to Jacob Holmes about this yesterday afternoon. He is the State House reporter for the Alabama Political Reporter. He said that after this hearing, he spoke to Cam Ward about this, and Cam Ward said, we have no interest in doing this. That is Orwellian. That is, just really, really kind of a crazy proposition, and we're not interested in that. And so that's good. That's good, and I'm happy for that. But it is very disturbing that Alabama politicians, Republicans and Democrats, are interested in the idea of allowing the state to microchip people. That's wild. That is a wild thing. But that's the world that we live in.
Yeah, I have no use for that. I just do not believe in putting microchips in people's bodies against their will. So, I hear what you're saying in terms of Prince Chestnut's bill. Maybe it is a little out there. It's, it's addressing something that doesn't really exist yet. But, I mean, here's the thing that maybe, to his credit, the fact that the Republican in the committee brought this up means there is some willingness to do this.
Right.
Maybe not in the employment situation, but certainly when it comes to convict labor.
Right.
And that bothers me on just like you said, in terms of human liberty, that really bothers me. And it bothers me that there was it didn't appear there was really any opposition in the committee hearing to that proposal. So, credit to Cam Ward for being clear that at least in his capacity, he's not interested in that. When you were telling me that other day, I mentioned to you, at least Cam Ward, I don't agree with his politics. I can't say I've been super impressed with his tenure so far in his current position. But he is not an idiot. He has said reasonable things in the past, including in his time in the legislature. So I'll give him credit for not having any interest in this. But the problem is, if you allow it,
right, somebody will
want to do it. And I find that really objectionable.
Right. And the big elephant in the room is really the thing about that a lot of this is really, I think, probably, it's not been stated, but I think a lot of this is really probably like motivated by like a religious idea of, the mark of the beast or whatever. And, I think that's probably
right. I've been hearing evangelicals talk about microchips being placed in our bodies as the mark of the beast. I've heard that for at least 20 years.
Yeah.
I mean, as far back as I can remember.
So it's worth understanding that that's like really...
That's the subtext here.
Yeah, that's kind of the subtext, I imagine. I would be shocked if it's not the subtext. I don't know. Maybe it's possible that Chestnut is just like really kind of into futuristic stuff, and he's also a big fan of employee freedom, and so
maybe he's caught wind of some business magazines talking about that sort of thing, and that would be what I think the subtext is. But I think it is even, as pernicious as it is, the idea that an employer would require a microchip, which would be pernicious. I would be right there if that actually came to be. Yeah, that's a red line. Like if that actually came to be, I would be right out there with, the evangelical, like anti-mark of the beast people. And I'm like, yeah, well, I'm not so concerned that this is a mark of the beast as I, as I am that this would be infringing on, somebody's liberty. But, whatever, we can have strange bedfellows. But the idea, as pernicious as that is, it is even more so the idea that the state would require it.
as a condition of your freedom, right? As a condition of your freedom, to have a microchip. Just really, really gross. Really gross. So we are going to go ahead and go to a break. On the other side, speaking about pardons and paroles and the criminal legal system in the state of Alabama, we're going to be talking to John Glenn. We're going to be talking to John Glenn about the state of Alabama prisons. He is really on the prison beat for the Alabama Political Reporter, and he does really great work. And he does great work really cataloging the cataloging the evil of Alabama's prison system. 2 or 3 times a week, it seems like he's got an article like, another death at this jail in Alabama. Yeah. And that's, it's important that we understand what we're doing to people.
Right. Alabama has one of the highest incarceration rates in the country, which has the highest incarceration rate in the world. We lock up more human beings inside the borders of Alabama than almost any other place on earth. And even the United States Department of Justice has found our state prison system to be unconstitutional, as in every single day, every person behind bars, their rights are being violated. It's disturbing, and so it is an important issue, particularly as it is working class people who are disproportionately bearing the burden of a broken criminal justice system.
Exactly. It's not bosses and wealthy people that are going to jail. It is working class folks. So
absolutely.
All right, you're listening to the Valley Labor Report. We're going to be right back with John Glenn from the Alabama Political Reporter.
IBW 558 is like a great football team. You've got to have the aptitude, skills, and knowledge to outperform the competition. If you're a non-union electrician, now is the perfect time to get off the sideline and join our team. We have the absolute best wages and benefit package in North Alabama and Southern Tennessee. It's because our team stands together, bargains together, and our families benefit from it. With immediate openings, you have the opportunity to see why the IBW is the right choice.
Support for the Valley Labor Report comes from the International Federation of Professional and Technical Engineers Union. Learn more by visiting www.ifpte.org.
The attorneys at Maples, Tucker & Jacobs have stood with the working people of Alabama for over 40 years, providing skilled legal representation for your workplace injury claims. When you are injured on the job, it can be a scary time. The attorneys at Maples, Tucker & Jacobs have the experience to guide you through the process to make sure that you and your family are properly taken care of and your rights are protected. If you need help, call the attorneys at Maples, Tucker & Jacobs at 855-617-9333 or visit online at www.mtnj.com. No representation is made that the quality of legal services provided is greater than the quality of legal services provided by other law firms.
Support for this program comes from the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Local 136, out of Central Alabama. Learn more at ibew136.org.
Attention union members, membership organizations, podcasters, or anyone with a payment processing need. The future is here, and your organization needs to be prepared by working with Unionly. With Unionly, your union or organization can take payments on a mobile device, eliminating processing fees, giving you a better price than other payment processing methods, while at the same time supporting a union-friendly business with a specialized skill set to meet your needs. Your members will thank you when they pay their dues at their convenience without waiting in line to deposit cash or check. Start preparing for the future today by calling 206-595-8631 or visiting unionly.io.
Are you looking for a better future, a career that can have you set for life, and to be a part of something that's bigger than yourself? If you are, then consider a skilled trades apprenticeship with the International Union of Painters and Allied Trades. The work of IUPAT is all around us, from the industrial painters who work on the bridges to drywall finishers, floor coverers, the glazers who install the glass in our skylines, and so much more. With an IUPAT apprenticeship, you earn while you learn and receive benefits while learning the trade, including a pension. We provide world-class education free of charge. That's right, no student debt. Our starting salaries for apprentices that graduate is above the national median salary with benefits for entire families. And you have the flexibility to take your trade wherever you'd like in the country to work. IUPAT District Council 77 covers our entire region, so give Adam Booth a call at 205-603-3142 for more information. Again, that phone number is 205-603-3142. Come build a better future with us today and join IUPAT.
Come all you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old union has come in here to dwell.
Labor creates all wealth should go to labor, and you are listening to the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host and fellow agitator Adam Keller, and we are broadcasting live from the Spice Radio studio. We've got a phone number, and the line is open. That number is 844-899-TVLR. That is 844-899-8857. You can call or text the program anytime throughout the live airing, and we might bring you on the air. Feel free to ask us any questions, comment on any of the stories, anything like that. We appreciate everybody watching us online. We've got Mel and Joe in the Facebook chat as always. Appreciate y'all listening. June Buggy, Dan Com, Alex Marquez, Perez, Munez, Diaz, Perez, Thoreau Fagundo. Good morning. William Pina from Teamster from out in California. Infinite Content, DL Cindero. Appreciate everybody. And DL Cindero asks if we were impacted by the tornadoes. I was not. I think that everything was fine up here. Is that right, Adam?
Yeah, I'm not aware of any. I mean, I'll be honest with you, I slept through it.
Yeah.
So I was not aware of anything quite up in our area, but, before we talk to John, definitely want to send our concern to all those who were affected by yesterday's storms and last night's storms.
Yeah.
Love and solidarity to all of our brothers and sisters in Mississippi in particular. I know the Mississippi Delta was hit pretty hard.
Yeah. All right. Well, so we have on the line John Glenn from the Alabama Political Reporter. He is, he writes on a lot of stuff, but he is the most consistent writer, I think, probably in Alabama on the state of our prisons. And so we wanted to talk to him about the latest on that. John, thanks for jumping on the show this morning. Appreciate it.
Of course, it's a pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. So first off, you mentioned this Frederick Bishop. He is a fellow who was denied parole 10 days after he died. Why would that be the case?
Well, there are several contributing factors to this mistake, whether with it happening. It's really kind of a communication nightmare, honestly, in the aftermath of all of this, because I honestly think that both the Alabama Department of Corrections and the Bureau of Pardons and Parole, are essentially trying to trade off blame in this particular instance, because both don't want to admit that a communication breakdown is more than likely what led to this happening. Essentially, he dies 10 days prior to his parole hearing, and 30 days prior to your parole hearing, a officer with the Bureau called an IPO, which stands for incarcerate. No, that's not it. It's internal parole officer. Yes, that's what it is. They essentially come in and they give an assessment of whomever is coming up for parole based on, like, are they at risk for flight? And they just give an interview. It's confidential, and so the only people that really get that information are the Bureau. But nonetheless, 30 days is that window where that IPO is supposed to meet with him. So this would have had to have been after that hearing with the IPO. So a spokesman with the ADOC told me after this article was published, because initially they just said, well, it was a mistake. We'll take steps to rectify this particular mistake. And I was told by a couple of different people that essentially when something like this happens, or rather something like this really doesn't happen. But if someone is up for their parole hearing, a death certificate, and they die prior to that, like a death certificate is supposed to reach the Bureau somehow. That really isn't the case. What happened, there's like a daily, I think it's a nightly log actually that the ADSC updates that shows, I don't know exactly what it shows, but it has to show who died that particular day or that particular week or something like that. And the Bureau is supposed to take that information and update their dockets accordingly. Obviously, that didn't happen. Now, that bit about the nightly log is what the ADSC spokesperson told me after the fact. And again, it's just it's a communication breakdown. Is what happened, and this egregious mistake is allowed to continue. And I had a couple of people that at least they work for the Bureau tell me that stuff like this, they've just never seen it happen. And they, again, chalk it up to communications and a sort of bureaucratic failure on the part of both entities. But I suppose that's a rounded answer to that particular question.
Yeah, well, and I think it's, I don't doubt that there was a communications failure, but also the idea that he's dead and he's being denied parole. That's also kind of indicative of the state of our Bureau of Pardons and Paroles, that they give out so few paroles. Talk to us about. Can you talk to us about? And I didn't think to prep you for this question. So this is a new question, and so if you don't have the information offhand, that's fine. But do you know offhand like what the percentage is of people who do actually get paroles, and then I know that it's small, and so why is it so small?
So for last year it was 10%. 10% of those eligible received their parole, which when you compare it to like the 5 years prior, 5 years prior it was like over half of those eligible were approved for parole, and now it's just 10%. For this year it's 6%, which out of the given like 1,400 folks that were eligible, and this current fiscal year, that's like almost 100, maybe less. And again, that's the reasons behind it are, I don't know. I frankly don't know, because it doesn't seem very like rational, this whole deal. It's entirely possible that it's to do with a vengeful board that simply wants to keep people in prison. It could just be that there are stricter criteria for parole than there used to be. I don't have that information in front of me, but I mean, it's obvious that there's a if there's not a concerted effort, there's at least a allowance of this low a percentage of folks to go up for their parole. This is actually something I remember about 2 days ago during the regular session in Montgomery, where they were discussing a bill to cut good time incentives, which had just happened somewhat recently. It passed the Senate. It's going to the House for consideration, but they were debating it in the Senate. And Minority Leader Bobby Singleton, he come up and he said that essentially this focus on good time and cutting it was to do with how little parole was being given out to folks. And that this really wouldn't be a topic of discussion had it not been for the fact that the state parole board just doesn't let people out of prison. So reasons behind it, it's, you'd have to ask those folks, and, the attempts that's been made really hasn't given any sort of concerted answer on that. It's egregious is what it is.
Well, and this another, so an effort to cut the amount of good time eligibility, you said passed the Senate, but one of the reasons for that is that as I understand it, is that there's this understanding on right-wing talk radio that our legal system is just simply too liberal. I've even heard comparisons to we are, our prisons are like more liberal than New York or California or whatever. And I don't know what the laws are in New York or California, but it just seems patently absurd. The idea that 6-7% of people eligible for parole are getting parole, and we have more prisoners than the average state. I think one of the highest per capita prison populations in the country, and then our country has the highest per capita prison population in the history of the world. We lock up more people in prison than the Soviet Union did in the gulags, right? I mean, this is, just a remarkably, just a remarkable system of incarceration. But there's this idea that we're just simply, the problem is that we don't lock enough humans in cages. And I'm sorry, that was kind of a rant, but how does that vision of our prison system match with reality?
Well, you said it quite literally about, if for instance we had more liberal policies, I don't think you would see 10% of folks last year being let out on parole, meaning those eligible being let out on parole. I don't think you would see the mass incarceration that you see, where it's upwards of 20,000 people, give or take, that are in state custody as we speak. The amount of death, rampant drug abuse, murders, suicides that happen in these prisons, and that's chalked up to liberal policies. Again, like all of the stuff that the state has done to organize the prisons, to create the current prison system that we have. In a lot of ways, it's also what they haven't done, is in some ways a reaction to like previous tough on crime policies of the 20th century, the later half of the 20th century, all of which I'd imagine the talk show radio host that you're mentioning would be more in favor of, would absolutely be in support of. And right. Anyways, depending on how old they are, probably like pontificated on during this particular period. But the thing about that good time incentive thing that just passed the Senate, of course, it was specifically to do with one instance of a fellow that was let out on good time, who then goes to, after about 2 months after he's released from state custody, ends up in Bibb County and shoots two sheriff's deputies in Bibb County, one of whom dies. I think it was Brad Johnson. In that instance, according to state code, according to the rules set in place already for doling out good time to incarcerated individuals, that this fellow, his name was Austin Patrick Hall, shouldn't have been released to begin with. He shouldn't have been allowed to accrue good time. He had escaped at one point from a Camden work release center in Wilcox County, and then during that escape ended up in Oxford, stole I think it was a City of Oxford Ford Explorer or something like that. It was a truck of some kind, or a car of some kind. Drives it into Georgia, leads a multi-agency chase into a neighboring state. He's brought back in and placed in the county jail, and still allowed to accrue good time, and still allowed to get let out. When in fact, what should have happened is that good time should have been forfeited, and that's under the state's own policy. Granted, the good time policies were very ill defined, and Ivey sent out, I believe this in January, an executive order that better defined them and added uniform standards for them. But nonetheless, that's a failure of the state. That instance is a failure of state. It's not a failure of policy, because again, we're talking about a incentive program that only 13% of those currently incarcerated are eligible for in the first place. And so, this is kind of ridiculous, frankly.
Yeah. It seems that way to me. And so, there are, like you said, and like I said, there are lots of people in prisons. And so talk to us about the state of our prisons. One of the, a very kind of archetypal John Glenn article is inmate dies at such and such prison. I mean, those articles come out so often. how are these deaths happening? And Frederick Bishop, I don't know the conditions of his death, but how are these deaths happening, and what are the rates of inmate deaths, and then like how are they how do you compare that to the rest of the country?
Okay, so first to answer the middle part of the question, because I think that'd probably be the best way to introduce this. I think since the last time we spoke, at least the last time I was on this show, which I believe was in October, 66 incarcerated individuals have died in ADOC custody.
Wow.
And within that period, in the week of Thanksgiving, nine incarcerated individuals died at 6 different correctional facilities. The day after Thanksgiving would be November the 25th, 5 individuals. Barry Christopher Culver, Albert Jackson Sorrells, Jimmy R. Hurst, and Jason Hopkins, and then there's one other individual, I think. I seem to remember, but I can't remember his name. All died that same day. And among those, for instance, Albert Jackson Sorrells, he's like 57 at the time of his death at Ventress. He was quite literally left to rot on his bunk. And this is according to the Montgomery Advertiser, Evan Molinas, who's an excellent writer on the subject. He did a story about this. Also, among those deaths was a 22-year-old named Cameron Holyfield, who, after he died, and apparently the autopsy shows that it was an overdose, he was buried at Limestone Correctional Facility at a pauper's grave without consent or knowledge of his family. Now, he had died at Staten Correctional Facility, which is like 170 miles to the south, give or take, on Thanksgiving Day. And he gets buried all the way up in the north bit of the state in a pauper's grave, and nobody knew about it. None of his family members knew about it. And this is all, by the way, when they are like primarily located in like Mobile County, give or take. And then I believe his stepmother lives out west someplace. And so it was my understanding, at least ADOC policy, was that you're supposed, if the family can't afford a grave and the state gives them one, it's supposed to be placed at a location where it's convenient for them to visit. But, by every indication that, they didn't get in contact with them. And like so often this happens, another incarcerated individual who was in Staten with Mr. Holyfield notified his mother, called her in the early morning that Thanksgiving saying, "Hey, your son just died." Also, there was that particular week, there was an overdose, I seem to remember, of a 20-year-old who he had overdosed that week and taken to an area hospital where he recovered and was returned back to prison. His name was Eddie Richmond. And then I think less than a month later, in December, he ends up dying. And, I haven't gotten an official autopsy on that, so I can't speak to the manner of his death. But, in total, from last year, it was, I believe, 270 people died.
Wow.
And that's according to statistics from the IDC that the Montgomery Advertiser obtained. And so far this year, it's been 31 fatalities. That both of these numbers, like last year's numbers may be more concrete, but especially this year's numbers shouldn't be taken at face value. Those numbers will most likely go up. But, last year was already the largest loss of life in state corrections history since 2002, which, if I'm not mistaken, was when they started taking stock of like how many people were actually dying in prison. I have no way to verify that last bit of, but at least since 2002, which is what Appleseed said. So as to the manner, I seem to remember the Equal Justice Initiative estimated in December of last year that of the folks that had died that year, 18 had died of homicide, 23 were suspected fatal overdoses. Again, these are most likely higher. And there was a vigil, there was a rally that was held during the State of the State in Montgomery, and Lauren Farina, who's the director of the Woods Foundation, she said that the state of Alabama not only has the highest in custody death rate in the country, but also the highest in custody murder rate and the highest in custody suicide rate of any state in the union. And given who she is, I absolutely believe that's the case. As to how this keeps happening, it goes back to the overcrowded nature of the facilities, fact that there are very few correctional officers actually there, present, doing their jobs in those particular facilities. They're overworked, underpaid, even with the wage increases and such. These facilities are dilapidated beyond recognition in some cases, where you have hundreds and hundreds of people crammed up into dorms, sleeping on top of each other. And this is allowed to persist for years. I hope I answered all the facets.
Yeah, no, you did.
But more or less, that's it.
Yeah, and one of the ways that Alabama politicians are seeking to remedy this issue is by building a huge mega prison. What are your thoughts on the degree to which that will help the problem?
Well, it's not going to increase bed space. That's already been proven.
Wow, really?
Most of I can't remember exactly the metrics, but the two new facilities won't increase. Well, they'll increase it, but it'll still be overcrowded, is what I'm saying.
Right.
Okay. I have to go back and look at that particular metric because Josh Moon, our columnist, was the one who found that out. I haven't been able to find that just yet. Regardless, one of the lines from Democratic Party members in both the House and the Senate when the initial funding package was going through was that, look, you're not going to fix the culture of this. I mean, you may make some nice spangly new prisons that have all sorts of different, extracurricular activity rooms, rehab facilities, whatever. But at the end of the day, they weren't convinced that this was going to fix the underlying problems of a culture that allows this to happen.
And John,
I don't think it. Go ahead, son.
I was going to say, correct me if I'm wrong here, but my understanding is the Department of Justice has also been pretty clear that you simply can't build your way out of the problems that they've identified.
Yes, that's true. That's absolutely true. And again, I can't name personally an instance of a state building mega prisons and being able to dig their way out of a horrendously violent and lethal correction system. I can't name a state that has been able to do that just by building new prisons. That being said, it's true to say that like these facilities need to be at least renovated at the very least, and that new facilities probably should be built in place of older facilities. But that's one of maybe four problems, like critical problems that just building new prison facilities will not fix.
And speaking of building new prison facilities, the price tag of this new mega prison has increased by an inordinate amount. Talk to us, how much has the price increased by, and how did that happen?
So it is increased. They set the cap at $975 million, so it's nearly $1 billion. And the original cap, which I swear to God I knew at some point, it's 600 and something odd billion. So it's increased almost by 50%, give or take. And the reasoning behind that, at least as I've been able to conjure, both it was Speaker Ledbetter and State Senator Greg Alburton, after the special session on ALPA funds finished, they cited inflation, i.e. price increases, as the reason that the construction, specifically the Elmore site, was going up. The price of that was going up. Undoubtedly, this is most likely a factor, but like after that, we kind of have to delve into more or less the speculative side, because so the funds come from state general fund budget, as well as a $400 million injection from COVID monies. And then, of course, there's the bond issue that came out. So that state bond issue fell short of its initial value, like something like $200 million or something like that. So it generated only $409 million in funds out of a bond issue that was supposed to be like $750 million. So that's one thing that could be to offset the downfalls of that bond issue. Another thing, it could be something to do, frankly, with the construction of it. There's something at the site that is causing this construction to inflate price-wise because of unforeseen structural issue, for instance, they have to take care of. I put a story in, I believe it's in January, where two separate people with knowledge of this particular construction site in Nomore County said that there were multiple sinkholes found at these sites, and that's caused work to be stopped and environmental assessment to come on the underlying soil and on this to be conducted, and that the preliminary results of that examination said that it was like an underground stream system or something running beneath the construction site. I have never been able to confirm this with the ADOC because they vehemently denied it initially, and they still deny it. That there were no sinkholes, work has not stopped. Commissioner John Hamm and Senate Minority Leader Bobby Singleton both also said that that wasn't the case. I mean, Singleton said he personally went out to the site and said there were no sinkholes. There's no structures being built at the facility at the moment. Well, I shouldn't say that. It's rather that there hasn't been any meaningful construction of the site in terms of building. There isn't. You go there and it's a flat field, massive area, where at least the last time I was there, there's a sort of a moat running around it, and there's water collected at the far end of that moat. There's flags placed out there. There's Cadell construction trailers that are on site. There's tractors. I mean, the last major bit of construction where you could visibly see people out there was when a construction company in Montgomery came out and leveled that whole area, flattened the land for the construction. Now, I haven't been there in a while. I haven't been there since January, so things might have changed. That being said, last time I was there, there was no meaningful indication that work was being done. And if work was being done, it just wasn't being done in the manner in which I think the state anticipated to. So yeah.
Gotcha. Well, John, is there anything else that you think that we haven't hit on that you think is important for folks to know about the state of our prisons or our legal system?
I mean, just that they continue to be deadly and not cost effective. We have an incarcerated population that is growing increasingly old. Not a lot of people are being let out of prison. And this narrative that it's to do with liberal policies, especially, or policies that don't fall within the purview of a tough on crime stance, is ridiculous. Frankly, it's ridiculous. But other than that, I think that more or less covers it.
John Glenn, reporter for the Alabama Political Reporter. We appreciate your time this morning. Thanks for talking to us.
Awesome. Thank you all.
Yep.
Thank you.
All right, folks, just a reminder, the phone number is 844-899-TVLR. That is 844-899-8857. We're going to take a break and be right back with the rest of the Valley Labor Report.
There's a lot of talk about a shortage of workers, but that's not the case with IBW 558. We have provided our customers over 3,000 workers and performed over 3 million man-hours in a pandemic year. With 8,000 OJT hours, 900 classroom hours, OSHA 30, and a state license, our members receive the equivalent of a master's degree. That's what makes IBW 558 the right choice for your electrical needs. Look us up at Facebook or at IBW558.org.
Support for this program is provided by the International Association for Machinists and Aerospace Workers, Local Lodge 44 in Decatur, Alabama. Learn more at IAMAW44.org.
Support for this program also comes from the Iron Workers, Local 477. So if you are looking for contractors with lower than average EMR and TRIR, they tell me that if you need to know what those mean, then you will. Or if you need to supplement a workforce at any level for any amount of time, short or long term, if you need iron workers that come trained and certified at no extra cost, or if you need workers from superintendent down to general laborer, and you're looking to start work on a project, or you're unhappy with your current contractor situation, you need to call my friend Jeb Miles with the Ironworkers Local 477. They only work with the best in the business, vetted contractors, and can do all kinds of jobs from roofing to steel and bridge erection, from welding to heavy rigging, from structural repairs to machinery alignment, and much more. They supply manpower on 4 of the 5 largest projects in North Alabama, so you know they're legit. If you need good quality, safe, efficient, diligent, and knowledgeable workers on your job, then you need the Ironworkers Local 477. Call Jeb Miles at 256-383-3334 or via email at local477@bellsouth.net, and make sure you tell them that you heard about them on the Valley Labor Report.
We're the nurses, firefighters, and claims representatives that help keep our government services running. We respond to natural disasters. We care for our nation's veterans, and we investigate discrimination in the workplace. We are federal and D.C. government workers, and we are proud to serve the American people. Working in more than 70 agencies across the government, we know we can fulfill our mission because our union has our back. Learn more at afge.org. Paid for by the American Federation of Government Employees, AFL-CIO.
The Laborers International Union of North America, Local 366, is proudly recruiting North Alabama workers to work construction and nuclear plant maintenance. If you're interested, please contact Donna at their training center to start the process. That phone number is 256-415-7452. Again, that phone number is 256-415-7452. No experience is needed. Free training is offered, but you must be able to pass a background check and a drug test. Local hiring that grows our community with good-paying jobs that have benefits is their mission. Live better, work union, Local 366, feel the power.
Support for this program also comes from the Mid-South Council of Retail, Wholesale, and Department Store Union. Learn more at rwdsu.info.
Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell. How the good old union has come in here to dwell.
Alabama's only union talk radio show. This is the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison. My co-host is Adam Keller. Our phone number is 844-899-TVLR. That is 844-899-8857. You can call the show, get on the air now, or leave us a voicemail throughout the week. Also wanted to make sure that we get this ad read in. We haven't got it in rotation yet. Sorry about that, folks. But we appreciate the support of our sponsor, our new sponsor, the United Auto Workers Union. So, do you work in an auto manufacturing plant? Are you tired of taking pride in your work without getting the respect you deserve? If you are, then consider joining the fight to unionize. Auto workers across the industry are coming together because, with a union, we can negotiate for the pay, benefits, and security that we deserve and can help sustain our families. In union plants, workers bargain for long-term wage increases, competitive bonuses, and more affordable benefits. You can join the growing wave of organizing today. Find out more and contact us at Uniting Auto Workers on Facebook, or contact the UAW Region 8 in Lebanon, Tennessee, by going to www.uawregion8.net. That's www.uawregion8, that's the number 8.net. A better future is ours. All right.
Really appreciate the new sponsors. Appreciate all of our sponsors. And, before we get into our next segment, I just wanted to talk a little bit about, for those of you who don't know, we air live on WVNN. Maybe some of you listening are listening that way right now. But I know a lot of our listeners tune in later as podcast or tune in through YouTube. So we're on WVNN, which is the right-wing talk radio station in Huntsville, Athens listening area, every Saturday from 9:30 to 11, the main show. Our overtime airs at 11 o'clock. That is online only on YouTube and Facebook. For those of you who don't know, we got our start on WVNN, which oddly enough is the birthplace of Sean Hannity and home to all sorts of reactionary propaganda that we find highly objectionable. But we think it's important to get a different perspective out there to multiple audiences. And we're happy that a portion of the show is replayed during the week on WZZA, the historic black radio station in Northwest Alabama, and on WHIV, which is a community radio station in New Orleans. We released the full episode on Spotify, Apple, and all the various podcasting apps. So please do subscribe to us on your app of choice and give us a good review. That's an easy way to help. And throughout the week, the clips of the show are released as standalone videos on YouTube and in some cases even TikTok. So if there's a specific segment or interview you want to find, we try to make it easy for you. And just do us a favor, hit subscribe, hit like, because all of our content is free, right? And we think that's important to keep it free. So special thanks to all of you who donate, all of you who comment and call in, all of you who've liked us, shared us, reviewed us. Your engagement on social media and the podcasting apps really does help, and that's a quick, easy, and free way to support the program. I know also there are folks who have tagged folks on Twitter to listen to us. I believe Infinite Content I saw had reached out to other programs. If there are other programs you listen to and you'd like to see us connect with them, hit them up. We're happy to be guests on other programs, and I'll mention that in a second, but we're happy to do that and collaborate with anyone really wanting to collaborate with us. So if you believe it's important to have our own media of, by, and for the Southern working class, please consider supporting us however you can. And please share with your coworkers, your friends, your family, your neighbors, the members of your union. If you haven't mentioned our show to them, let them know. Let them know about the Valley Labor Report. We know there's a lot of good causes to support, and our audience are working folks with limited incomes. So if you do find value in our project and you can chip in a couple bucks, it would really mean a lot. We've got some great stuff planned as we grow the project, and we just can't do it without you. And on that note, I wanted to mention, some folks are aware, but maybe not everyone is aware, that we have started a new weekly episode on Thursday mornings called Shop Talk. Shop Talk is dedicated to labor education, history, and training, right? So we're going to keep all the news and commentary. The more political stuff is going to stay on Saturdays. Thursday morning Shop Talk is really more of a, an educational series. And the goal there is that every month there's at least, an episode or two that unions can share with their members to supplement their training and professional development programs. So for the first episode of Shop Talk, I actually went into a little dive into the Walker County teacher strike of 1979. It's the first teacher strike in the state of Alabama, to my knowledge. It was also a successful strike, and it involved not just the teachers, but the support staff as well, similar to Los Angeles schools and what's been happening there. So that's the kind of labor history, especially local labor history and Southern-themed labor history that we'll be doing on the show. Last week, I spoke with Joe DeManuel Hall from Labor Notes, and this was more of a training episode. We went really deep on Steward's Corner, which is something that they put out in their magazine. Labor Notes has a lot of stewards training resources on their website as well. So we talked all about that. How can Labor Notes help you? If you're a steward, if you're interested in being a steward, if you're just interested in getting more involved in your union, period, and you don't know where to start, we talked about Labor Notes and the resources they have available. This week, I did an episode all about how to get engaged as a new member, because we hear that from folks pretty regular. Folks who join the union, or folks who are, in a new union shop, or maybe folks who've been members for a while but have never really gotten involved, and they ask, how do I get involved? Where do I start? What do I do? Right? So we did an entire episode this week on how to get involved as a member in your union, right? And this was tailored towards individuals. A whole separate episode could be about how unions themselves can do a better job engaging their new members and getting them involved. I'm really excited about some of the episodes we have coming up. I'm speaking with the Alabama channel on setting up an interview with them to talk about how they monitor the Alabama legislature and how you as a union member or as a community activist can learn the legislative session, the legislative process, and learn a little bit about how that works and how you can get involved. Next week, I have a very exciting episode planned. Max Frazier from the University of Miami, a great labor historian, is coming on to Shop Talk next week. You don't want to miss that. He's got a new book coming out called Hillbilly Highway, which is all about the making of the Trans-Appalachian white working class. He's written for The Nation and many other publications, and he is also a member of the Communications Committee of LAWCHA, the Labor and Working Class History Association, which I'm a proud member of. So really looking forward to next week. So for those of you who haven't picked up on it yet, you haven't listened to any of the Shop Talk episodes, next week will be a great one. Hopefully you can go back and check out the last couple episodes we've put out. As with our main show, it comes out as a podcast, a few days after it airs. So it airs live Thursday mornings online, as a podcast a few days later. And I really hope it will be helpful for folks. I hope that folks who have a passion for labor history will really dig some of the material, and particularly the training aspects, the educational aspects. I want to really be a resource for folks. Some of the videos that we've done that are our most popular are some of those educational videos, the Unions 101. Jacob was reminding me of a video he did with David Story, our founding father of the show, about how to negotiate contracts. And it's an old video. The quality's not as great as far as audio and video, but it still gets a lot of views, and that's because it's evergreen, right? It's material that folks will always be interested in and have those questions. So, if you are looking to get involved in your union as a new member or just to get newly involved, check out this past week's episode of Shop Talk. And also on that note, this week I was a guest on America's Workforce Radio with Ed Flash Ferentz. Really enjoyed that. Jacob has been a guest, 2 or 3 times, maybe more.
I think at least 3.
Yeah, Jacob is a recurring guest, and he had the idea that, I should get on there too. And so we made that happen. So we really appreciate America's Workforce Radio. I believe it was Wednesday's episode. So check out Wednesday's episode. Just like our show, it is available as a podcast. My interview was towards the end of the show, and I had a chance to talk about the UMWA strike being, obviously being the biggest Alabama story, and mention the Teamsters win here in Huntsville City. Got to talk a little bit about the Valley Labor Report and our expansion plans and our website and the reporting we're doing on TVLR.fm. So definitely check out America's Workforce Radio. Check out the episode from this week. It was a great opportunity, and love to do that. So if you have any programs that you listen to and you think, maybe Jacob and Adam should be on there, let us know. Let them know. We're happy to make that happen. We are down to spread the gospel of solidarity wherever they'll let us. And of course, we're happy to promote the Valley Labor Report because we believe that we're doing important work here and filling a void in the media. So, all we can do is just try to expand that audience and expand that reach. And we appreciate everyone who's helped us do that.
Absolutely. We've only got a few more minutes left in the main show, so I'll just do this quick hit about a resolution to some citations that Hyundai received. The Hyundai supply chain in Alabama is just really uniquely bad, for lack of a better word. Not only are they exploiting children, not only are they subjecting their workforce to racism on the floor and in the boardroom, it's also a dangerous workplace. And this also showcases, this case is illustrative of just how, how employers get away with so much stuff, because this is a resolution in 2023 of an incident that happened in 2016. In 2016, the Department of Labor in a week or so ago had a press release saying that an administrative law judge affirmed citations that an Alabama automotive parts supplier pay $1.3 million in penalties after a 20-year-old worker's 2016 death. The Hyundai Kia parts maker, June LLC, failed to protect workers from crushing and other hazards. So this was released from Caseta. The Independent Occupational Safety and Health Review Commission has affirmed citations issued by the U.S. Department of Labor's Occupational Safety and Health Administration to a global auto parts supplier after the 2016 death of a 20-year-old machine operator at an Alabama manufacturing facility. That decision comes after June LLC, operating as Agent USA, contested OSHA citations after an investigation of how an employee at its Caseta facility suffered fatal crushing wounds in crushing injuries in June of 2016 in a robotic machine. OSHA inspectors learned that the machine operator and 3 co-workers entered a robotic cell on the assembly line to clear a sensor fault, when a robot inside the cell restarted abruptly, crushing the young woman inside. Its inspection led OSHA to cite the company for 51 safety violations, including 48 willful violations. On February 10th, 2023, an administrative law judge upheld the majority of the violations that OSHA issued. Agent USA will pay more than $1.3 million to address the violations. I mean, it's just really, really wild stuff here that it's taken 7 years to come to a resolution on this, when it seems from everything that I've read about this, it just seems totally clear that there were issues, and the idea that it would take 7 years for something like this to get resolved is just disgusting. Really, really disgusting.
And I know we've got to move on to plugs, but I just got to put this quote in here from the OSHA Regional Administrator, Kurt Petermeyer. He said, "Failing to lock out equipment causes far too many serious injuries and deaths. In this case, a young woman lost her life because her employer took shortcuts to minimize downtime and maintain production." Just awful.
Yeah. Really, really disgusting. But the thing has been resolved at this point. They now have to pay a $500,000 fine and $1 million in restitution to the deceased woman's estate after the company pled guilty. So obviously, it's not going to bring the woman back, but hopefully that brings some amount of material comfort to the family.
Absolutely.
So with that, folks, we're going on into the second half of the program. We're getting off of the radio. Find us on YouTube, Facebook, where you can continue listening to us. As we're going off the air, we have a couple of plugs. Just a reminder that the Alabama AFL-CIO has a roadkill barbecue on the 5th, where we're going to be talking to some politicians about why they should not try to hurt working people. It's going to be a real uphill battle, but we'll see. The grand opening of the Automotive Free Clinic will begin at 1 p.m. on April 15th in Prattville. It's going to include live music and food, so consider going to that. You can find out more about them on their Facebook page, the Automotive Free Clinic. Labor Notes obviously continues to have online trainings. Find out more at labornotes.org. Go to their events page. Get on our email list, tvlr.fm/contact. And with that, we will see you next week. All right, folks, we're off the air now. We've got a great overtime lined up for you. We are going to be talking about the LA school strike. LAUSD support staff went on strike. The teachers joined them. They had a huge win. They won bigly, as some might say. We're also going to be talking to McKenna Shueler about Disney workers who similarly won bigly, as some might say. So
really excited to talk to McKenna. She's got a lot to report from Florida.
Yeah.
There's a lot happening in terms of labor down in Florida, so really want to hear about the Disney World negotiations and how things have gone there. Of course, especially my IATSE sisters and brothers. But there's also some really wild anti-labor bills being pushed through.
Yeah.
I was telling my wife this morning, we're going to hear some updates from Florida. DeSantis is doing something crazy. She was like, he seems to do something crazy every day, right? It's like every day you hear something about DeSantis. So this is going to be good. Really looking forward to talking to McKenna.
Yeah. So with that, we're going to take a quick break and we'll head into overtime. So stay tuned. You're listening to the Valley Labor Report.
Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old union has come in here to dwell.
You're listening to the Valley Labor Report. This is Alabama's only union talk radio show. We're now in overtime. That's the second half of the program where we are online only. So make sure that in particular that you are liking and subscribing if you're watching us live. Give us a rating on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen to us. Give us a rating so that, I don't know, they tell me that it helps the algorithm. I'm not sure, but presumably it does. Can't hurt. It can't hurt. So do that for us. Also, our line is still open in overtime. That phone number is 844-899-TVLR. That is 844-899-8857. You can call or text throughout the show. You might get on the air, or you can leave us a voicemail, send us a text throughout the week. We might address it on the next program.
Yeah, we haven't had any voicemails to play in a couple weeks.
Yeah.
I know we haven't had the line open very often. We have been pretty slam-packed, so definitely leave some voicemails throughout the week if you're interested.
Yep. So before we get to McKenna, we're going to talk. There's this, we're going to continue talking about the push to privatize public schools as long as it's relevant in Alabama and nationally. And there's this huge trend nationally to privatize public schools, and they're doing it behind this facade of like wokeness or whatever, this meaningless kind of thing. And one of the things that we try to do when we talk about this issue is and one of the things that we want to point out is that none of the advocates ever actually show you proof cases, right? And listen for it. Listen for it. And look for it when you're reading, and listen for it when you're listening to these folks. They never tell you any statistics or even honestly any like anecdotes about how quote unquote school choice works. They'll give you these fluffy hypothetical stuff. Theoretically, maybe somebody's going to get a better education. Theoretically. They never ever give you any data to prove that. And they very rarely give you an anecdote. Occasionally they might give you an anecdote, but that's very rare. And so listen for that. Because the school choice, the school vouchers, school privatization, it has been done. It has been done. They have enacted full-scale voucher programs in states across the country. And so theoretically, if they really wanted to strengthen their case, if their case was actually rock solid, they would be coming out with all of this information about look at how much student performance has increased with the implementation of a voucher program. And one of the arguments that they say is that, competition is going to make the failing public schools even better. Well, if that was the case, then show us the data. Show us that's the case. Prove it to us, because we've done the thing, so prove it to us. And they don't, because it's not real. It doesn't actually benefit students. It doesn't actually benefit the failing quote-unquote public schools. And the only people that it benefits are the wealthy people who get subsidies for private schools that their kids were already attending, and the CEOs of these private schools. But there's also the anecdotal data. And the anecdotal data is, it's important and it's relevant. And there is an anecdotal case out of Montgomery of just what happens when you have an unaccountable charter school. And so, Adam, talk to us about this charter school in Montgomery.
Yeah, this is the infamous Lead Academy. And this is just the latest scandal in a series of scandals, frankly, from this charter school in Montgomery. And in this case, we've got some, let's say, mismanagement. It would be one way of phrasing it. The bottom line is that this Montgomery Charter School Lead Academy is going to have to repay $1.9 million to the feds. But it doesn't have the money, they say. And that's according to a recent article by Tricia Crane with AL.com, published on March 17th. So what happened is that there was an audit, and an audit found that the school did not accurately track more than 600,000 meals served in 2021 and 2022. In 2022, the U.S. Department of Agriculture received an anonymous complaint alleging that Crave Cafeteria Solutions, the vendor supplying meals at Lead Academy, inflated the number of children and meals served during the 2021-22 school year. I'm going to pause here and just say, you will hear folks, particularly supporters of charter schools, say that, well, these are public charter schools, they're public schools, they're not for profit, because in Alabama, at least, they are public charter schools. But there are so many ways to put public dollars in private hands. And this is a prime example, right? At a normal school, the school feeds its own kids. Employees of the school system prepare the food and serve the food. And the school system central office purchase the food. In a charter school, you can contract with a vendor to handle this for you. And common sense dictates there's room for malfeasance. So back to the article. After this audit and after the complaint, the school now has to find a way to repay the USDA nearly $2 million. Paul Morin, who serves on the Alabama Public Charter School Commission, which oversees LEAD and other state charter schools, called the audit and questions about the school's leadership a major issue at a recent meeting. The commission recently denied the school's request to expand 9th grade enrollment. Now, Lead Academy Board President Charlotte Meadows, a former state legislator, frankly, one of the few on a short list of people, if you had to identify who is behind school choice and school reform and privatization in the state of Alabama, Charlotte Meadows is going to be on the short list there. She's at the top. So she is actually the president of this scandalous charter school and formerly served in the legislature. She claims that the school doesn't have any money connected to the meals on hand because the money was used to pay the vendor, Crave. And in statements to AL.com and in their lawsuits, school and Crave cafeteria officials each claim the other party was responsible for properly counting the meals, right? So now they're just pointing fingers and placing blame. Meadows claimed that Crave employees did not follow proper procedures or keep proper records. She also said the pandemic school year plus shifting federal guidance caused miscommunication. Lead Academy has sued Crave for $2 million, which is the amount owed plus interest. The school claimed the company breached its contract and defrauded the school by inflating the number of school meals it could claim. In January, a judge issued a default judgment and ordered Crave to repay the money. Meadows said Lead Academy is pursuing all legal means to collect the taxpayers' money from Crave so it can return it to the USDA. But Brian Pleasant, who owns Crave, refuted her claims. He said to AL.com that the school staff were responsible for properly counting and claiming the number of the number of students and meals served. So Crave, led by Pleasant, filed an appeal in February, and that's still ongoing. Jason Swan with the State Department of Education said the department is working with Lead Academy officials on next steps. They gave the school until September 2027 to repay the full amount, according to Meadows, which is interesting. The Alabama Board of Education Vice President Wayne Reynolds, who's from Athens, said in an email to state board members Friday that the State Department should obtain approval from the state board before moving forward with any decisions about the repayment plan. Now, Lead Academy, as I mentioned, this isn't their first scandal. They've been involved in multiple lawsuits. They had issues even getting open. They should have never been allowed to open, frankly. But I'm sure the fact that, they were very well connected may have helped them get their application through. At one point, Montgomery County Schools had to step in and provide meal services for the school. Wow. So, yeah, that had to sting a little bit, right? You're forced to step in and help this school that's siphoning funding and siphoning students from your district. And then they turn around and at least somebody is inflating it, right? That is a very easy way to commit fraud inside the school system, is that you claim you're serving more meals than you really are. And I heard plenty of scuttlebutt in Huntsville over the years representing employees there. I never had any concrete proof, never could bust them 100%, but there were allegations. So this is not necessarily unique, but charter schools have more room for fraud, and Lead Academy in particular has quite the scandalous reputation. And so I'll also point you to an article by Josh Moon in the Alabama Political Reporter. What is school choice? Lead Academy is the perfect example. And so, much like Jacob's introduction, he sort of ties this example of Lead Academy to the broader issue of so-called school choice, because he points out that this is the most common outcome. Mismanagement, alleged fraud, allegations of special needs children being pushed away, scandal after scandal, and perhaps most importantly, educational outcomes that are typically worse overall for students. So, Lead Academy, there's a lot more we could go into there, frankly, but it's if you're interested in like what has the charter school movement looked like in Alabama, check out Lead Academy. That's going to give you a good idea of the sort of issues that we're seeing, and some of the fraud, some of the mismanagement, some of the segregation. And by segregation, I don't mean just on race, but ability, class. There's a lot of disturbing things that happen in these charter schools, and the Network for Public Education has been really on top of this from the federal level. They release reports nearly every year on fraud in the federal charter school system. We're talking millions of dollars of fraud. Straight up fraud, not just like, maybe it's not the best use of money. No, we're talking legitimately fraud. Right. Millions of dollars has come from taxpayer money. Back in 2019, they had a report showing the federal government had lost $1 billion to charter school waste and fraud. That was 2019, and that was just what the federal government had lost. It's disturbing. And I know from my experience in Huntsville City Schools, whenever you deal with vendors, you always have risk of corruption. You have risk of misallocation of funds and mismanagement of funds. And then you have the battles over the contract renewals, which can often end in lawsuits. I remember a few years back, Huntsville City Schools wanted to swap to a different vendor for their supply of temp labor, right? And they disqualified one of the vendors because they had been so awful. Then they ended up in court over it. Then there was the whole situation with Pinnacle, which was the privatized alternative school in Huntsville. And it just so happened the CEO of Pinnacle happened to be dating the superintendent of Huntsville City Schools at the time. And that whole thing blew up into competing lawsuits where each side was blaming the other. It's just messy. And that is why when folks want to tell you to run schools like a business, they don't know what the hell they're talking about.
Right.
Or they do know what they're talking about and they stand to gain financially.
Yep. All right, Adam, thanks for that. So next up, we're going to be talking to McKenna Shueler. Is she in the Zoom?
She is, yes.
Fantastic. Yeah, so McKenna Shueler is a reporter for the Orlando Weekly. She has been reporting on the Disney negotiations and as well as some of the anti-union stuff going on in the legislature in Florida. McKenna, thanks for taking the time to talk to us this morning.
Yeah, thanks so much for inviting me on. Really excited to be here.
Absolutely. Excited to have you. You've been doing some great stuff on the Disney negotiations in particular. That's what I've been following most closely from your work. And the last time that we spoke about this a month ago, 6 weeks ago, something like that, Disney workers had just voted down a deal by, what was it, 96% offered by Disney. Was that right? Is that right?
Yeah, it was about 14,000, a little over 14,000 workers that voted, and of that, 96% voted it down. And that was Disney's so-called best offer, which evidently wasn't their best.
Right. It's the last best and final is always is very rarely actually the last best and final offer. So they voted it down by a wide margin, and after that, the negotiators for both sides came back to the table, and what do you know, there is a better offer on the table, and that offer has been tentatively accepted by the bargaining committee of the unions. It hasn't gone to a vote by the members yet, right?
No, that's going to be next Wednesday.
Yeah, so it hasn't been accepted by the members, and so it's important to understand that a tentative agreement is just, more or less, the bargaining committees for the unions are saying, yes, this is a good deal. We recommend people ratify it. Whereas before, the bargaining committees of the unions were actually campaigning against accepting the contract, right?
Yep.
Yeah,
That's true.
So definitely a different, and so obviously this deal has come a long way, at least in the eyes of the negotiators for the unions. And so talk to us about the difference between the contract that was voted down and the contract that Disney employees are going to be voting on this week.
Yeah, so even between that, there was another offer that Disney came back with after the 96% rejection. And that ended up actually being a worse offer, where the first offer was a $1 pay raise in the first year for many workers. Mm-hmm. And that was overwhelmingly rejected. Then Disney came back, and that would have raised the minimum wage, for instance, from 15 to 16. Then Disney came back and said, okay, we'll do 17 this year, but they reduced the retroactive pay for workers. So Paul Cox, president of IATSE Local 631, which represents some of the workers there, the way he described it, just kind of like moving around the furniture. It's just the same money, but it would have been a worse deal. So they were supposed to go back to negotiations, I think, for like 2 days, but after that first day, they just stopped. And so then there were a few weeks where there wasn't much going on, except, I shouldn't say that, but workers did hold a rally a couple weeks ago. And then, so the difference is with this new tentative agreement, it really was what, as far as wages, it was what the unions have been fighting for, is my understanding. So a $3 minimum pay raise across the board this first year in 2023, by the end of the year, that will go into effect. And then some immediate raises right away. And then over the course of the contract, it'll go up to $20.50 by October 2026, which is more than double what it was a decade ago, 2 contract cycles ago, when the minimum wage at Disney was just $10. So, and then it's my understanding as well that the wage raises, the raises over the course of the contract will range between $5.50 and I think it's $8.40. So depending on your job classification, but that's like a double-digit percentage wage increase for a lot of these workers. So that's especially in an area like Central Florida, where the cost of living has just skyrocketed. That's the difference between being able to pay rent, being able to, buy food for your kids, and not being able to.
Absolutely. And so what has the reaction of the members been to this, as they're preparing to vote on it?
As far as I know, it seems to be a victory. I haven't had the chance to talk to a lot of individual members yet because, unfortunately, the announcement came literally at the same time that there was a committee meeting being heard on the anti-union legislation. So I was kind of like, I wasn't able to go to the tentative agreement announcement in person, which I was really sad about.
Right.
I just kind of tuned in virtually, but yeah, I'm looking forward to hopefully next week, being able to maybe get in touch with some members and talk to them about what they think about this. But I think it's widely being celebrated as a victory.
And what would you, covering this negotiation process, what would you credit to? Trying to think of how to ask this. How would to what would you credit the victory? I guess why was it that Disney came from a $1 an hour raise to a $3 an hour raise in the first year? What was it that kind of forced their hand?
I mean, I'm sure it was definitely a multitude of factors, but not gonna lie, probably all the bad press didn't help. And there was a lot of just press coming, it was from national press was covering this, local news, and I know me and at Orlando Weekly, and then over at the Orlando Sentinel, which is the bigger publication here in the area, just we've found different angles to report on as far as how wages currently for Disney World workers just is not enough to make ends meet for not just individual workers, but their families as well. And actually just a couple days before the tentative agreement was announced, I did a pretty long piece. I think it's like almost 3,000 words, or maybe about 3,000 words, on specifically costuming workers at Disney World, which were represented by IATSE Local 631. And that sort of documented what the union describes as a gender pay gap, which is essentially costuming workers at Disney World who are predominantly female, not all, but predominantly, are paid less than their union siblings, stage technicians, electrical techs. And that was a really interesting story that I first talked to Paul Cox, the president of that union. He first mentioned it to me weeks and weeks ago, and I've been pretty busy with a bunch of different assignments. I'm a little bit stretched thin here, but I really wanted to be able to write about that, because when he first mentioned a gender pay gap within their local, and not only that, but he mentioned when he was surveying workers last year to kind of figure out priorities for negotiations, that was the number one issue within their local, was closing that gender pay gap, even above, higher wages in general. So, and I hadn't seen any reporting on that. So before I published my story, Truth Out actually did their own story on it as well. But
yeah, and you can find, and I'm looking at that here, the title is We're Not Birds and Mice, Costuming Cast Members Want Disney World to Close the Gender Pay Gap. You can find that by McKenna Shueler on the Orlando Weekly. And I have read some of that, and it's, and what are some of the, the cost of living stuff? What were some of the stories that you were able to uncover about, these wages and, not being able to cover their living expenses?
Yeah, so something to understand about Central Florida is, for one thing, across the state of Florida, average rent has gone up, I believe, 36% since 2020. And then the Central Florida region, which is the Orlando kind of region, it is, an average like 30% rent increase from 2020. Some people have reported just hundreds of dollars of in their rent increases. And it's increasingly more difficult to buy a home these days as well. But even like one person I talked to, she has a home, but she lives like an hour away to go to work. And then it's an hour and a half, 2 hours back. Plus with gas prices skyrocketing over the last year, there was that. Sorry, I feel like I'm rambling a little bit.
No, you're fine.
Of your question, Jacob?
I was interested in knowing some of the personal stories about the difficulties that that these workers had faced in the increase in the cost of living with the wages they were getting at Disney.
Yeah, so I did luckily have the opportunity. I think what really made this story so special was that I was able to meet with a group of like 10 workers after their shifts one day a couple weeks ago. We met at a local park kind of near their costuming warehouse. And some of the cast members, employees were there just kind of like in solidarity, and they didn't really talk to me necessarily, but they were just there to show support and to show that they cared about this issue, the gender pay gap that is. And of the people that I did talk to, I mean, they reported similar things as far as just these huge rent hikes, and none of the costuming workers that I know of reported necessarily being homeless, although there have been cast members across the parks that have reported seeing coworkers sleeping in their cars and such. But it's a lot of people, just like a lot of people living in one's like 4 to 5 cast members in one place, just rooming up. It's a scramble. Like it's a huge issue that's affecting the whole region, and the Central Florida economy is dependent upon this low wage tourist and service economy. So it's something that, at Disney World, they're very lucky to have this union. Not everybody has that, but it is just a sort of regional issue.
Right. Well,
before we switch gears, I wanted to ask, and I want to point out, first of all, that this is affecting about 40,000 workers. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's somewhere between, I think, 42 to 45,000 workers.
That's just huge. And how many unions are there as part of this process? Because I know there's quite a few.
Yeah, there's 6 unions, and I have it listed somewhere if I can find it. It's IATSE Local 631, the Teamsters Local, Transportation Communications Union, and UFCW, and a couple Unite Here locals. And I think the Unite Here locals actually cover maybe the majority or just a higher percentage of the workers, but it's everybody from like people who are working in attractions, costuming, lifeguards, guest services, bus drivers, just across the board. A lot of, 42 to 45,000 workers.
Wow. That's huge. I mean, this is going to change the entire community, really, by lifting up these folks. That's gonna have a positive impact everywhere. And so
absolutely. Think about the idea of 40,000 people. Obviously not everybody is going to be getting the $3 an hour exactly, but a lot of these 40,000 people are going to be getting a double-digit wage increase in one defined area. I mean, that's for the local, we understand that trickle down is more or less bunk, but the multiplier effect that you do get in a local economy when more working people have the money to spend is really, I think that this is going to be good for the entire community.
Yeah, no, I mean, actually, we saw that with the last cycle. The Orlando Sentinel actually reported on this pretty closely. I lived in Tampa at the time, so I wasn't covering this, but we saw with the last cycle when they raised the minimum wage to $15 effective 2021, but the contract was negotiated, I believe, 2018. After Disney ratified that contract, we saw Universal and SeaWorld, which are not unionized, still followed suit and began starting to raise their wages. So it is something that really sets a standard in the region. So it is incredibly important in that respect.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so let's shift gears then and talk about some of the political situation in Florida. I think DeSantis is more or less a household name at this point. And one of the things that he is doing is attacking unions in Florida. What are some of the ways that he's attacking labor down there?
So, one of his number one I shouldn't say his number one enemy, but a big enemy of DeSantis is the teachers unions. I mean, he's waged the war on the teachers unions. They all went behind his opponent, Charlie Crist, last year. Charlie Crist's running mate was a teachers union president herself. But in January of this year, DeSantis unveiled this so-called Teachers Bill of Rights that was just a blatant attack on teachers unions. And then within a couple months, Republican lawmakers introduced legislation that doesn't just target teachers unions, it targets public sector unions at large, with the exception of unions representing firefighters, cops, corrections staff, and probation officers, which should be mentioned. This is yeah, the unions that traditionally endorse and give a lot of campaign cash to Republicans, including the bill sponsor of the Senate bill, which is advancing the fastest. That bill sponsor alone has received at least $15,000 from police unions since 2020. I did a little bit digging the other day. But so this legislation, I should mention, like it's been introduced, like similar iterations have been introduced since 2011 when Matt Gaetz was bringing forth that legislation. And so what this legislation specifically would do would place a ban on automatic dues deduction, and similar but even worse than last year's version, the bill would impose a 60% membership threshold, where in Florida, teachers unions are already required to meet a 50% threshold and under a bill signed into law in 2018. But everybody I've spoken to, has said it's hard to reach a 60% threshold in a right to work state. And there are unions that have reached and surpassed the 60% threshold, but there has been just a wave of opposition to this legislation. The only support for it is the only open support, I should say, is coming from representatives of conservative think tanks. So
right. Of course. And that and all of these bills anywhere, bills like this have not only historically been introduced in Florida, but they have been historically and contemporaneously introduced all across the country by, right-wing anti-labor freaks. And they always do basically the same thing. And they always have an exception for cops. And that really goes to show that this is not about individual freedom. It's not about individual liberty or an individual Bill of Rights. It is simply and totally naked power grabbing.
I should say,
yeah.
Sorry.
No, go
I
ahead.
should say, he's been pushed on that too, as far as the exemption. That was one of the first questions I asked him. Because he argues, the Senate bill sponsor argues it's a pro-union piece of legislation because it will force union bosses to have more face-to-face conversations with their union members or workers to maintain or reach that threshold, and to have more conversations when, if there's a ban on dues deduction. He keeps bringing up this thing about how, I guess I should say, his explanation for why he is exempting the cops, the firefighters, the corrections staff is they are a, quote, special class of workers who work long hours, sometimes second and third shifts. And repeatedly he's mentioned he doesn't want these workers who are risking their lives working second and third shifts to have to go to a union rep after work to give them their check. And the backlash that he's received about that has been just incredible. Before he was even asked by lawmakers in committee stops, I talked to a few union members, specifically teachers and faculty members, on the phone, and I repeated that explanation to them because the first time I reached out to the Senate bill sponsor, he emailed me back. He hasn't since. But I read that to them, and there's a lot of workers in the public sector that are working very long hours. Particularly, one example that I hadn't really thought of before people were starting to bring it up is resident physicians and nurses at public hospitals in the state of Florida, some of whom are working upwards of 80 hours a week. And they depend on their union, but especially the resident physicians, they've brought up that because of how residency works, it would be pretty much impossible for them to reach and maintain that 60% threshold because of the turnover in their union. So they would risk decertification, and as a result, they would lose their union contract if that decertification went into effect.
Right. Yeah, it's just totally a naked power grab, rewarding political allies and trying to hurt political enemies, and it's really, really, really gross. But you mentioned in your piece that was published just yesterday, Florida's anti-union bill could risk over $500 million in federal funds. So talk to us. There's this, obviously the anti-union piece of it, despite, the insistence that it's pro-union, obviously the impact on unions would be negative. But there's also there's an interesting fiscal component to the effects of this bill. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, so before I even get to the big one, a Senate bill analysis for the Senate version estimates that just the recertification process for unions that fall below 60% would cost the state an estimated over $900,000. So there's that, which is known. But the thing that I've been trying to report on a little bit more over the past week, which I'm honestly surprised has not been reported on before, as far as I know, especially because similar legislation has been proposed in for the past decade, and maybe in older years there was some reporting on it, but I haven't been able to find it, is a claim by, it came from the Amalgamated Transit Union first, which represents about 6,000 transit workers in the state of Florida. And they've been emailing lawmakers and bringing up, they've also emailed the Department of Labor about this as well to confirm or just to see if this is true. But they say that if this bill passed, because of they say that if this bill would pass, it would risk over $500 million in federal transit funds for the state of Florida in this year alone, in the next year, because of employee protections under the Federal Transit Act. And that includes the preservation of rights and benefits of employees under existing collective bargaining agreements, the continuation of collective bargaining rights, the protection of individual employees against a worsening of their positions in relation to their employment. So the union argues that the ban on dues deduction, for instance, would infringe upon their right to bargain for that. And if the unions were decertified, then they argue that that would also violate the protections within the Federal Transit Act. And so because of all the money flowing in from the Biden infrastructure bill, the unions say that could be at risk for the state of Florida. And I know even where I am in Orlando, that's $43 million in this year alone. But yeah, so I'm pretty sure I broke the story on that last week, I think. But it's starting to make the rounds, and there was actually a Republican lawmaker on Thursday who finally brought it up with the bill sponsor, and he denied it. Then when he was pushed on it further, he said that he would double check to make sure. He argued that under the law, workers don't have to be protected by a collective bargaining agreement. It can be just any sort of protective agreement. And I'm not sure that's true. He brought up, there are public transit workers in other states that have outright, banned collective bargaining rights for public sector workers. There are transit workers there that the systems do get funding. But so I still honestly, to be fully transparent, I'm not entirely sure if that would happen, if all of that money would be entirely at risk. But it seems, based on communications I've read between the union, the ATU, and the DOL, and what I've heard from various people within the ATU that I've talked to, it seems like the claim the risk of losing all that money does have merit.
Interesting. Yeah, that's definitely, that's a fascinating point in that story. Are there any other anti-union bills that are coming from Florida's legislature or being proposed by the governor?
I mean, that's the most explicitly anti-union, but there's also a few other bills that affect labor. For instance, there's a bill, probably the next most closely linked is HB 917. It's called vaguely state minimum wage, but essentially what it would do is carve out minor league players from Florida's minimum wage, which is currently $11 per hour. And there's a reporter, Jason Garcia, who's been doing a lot of good reporting on that. But the sad thing too is that bill is actually advancing as well, which is just incredible to think about, that you would do something like that when there are already a lot of minor leaguers that have reported poverty wage conditions.
Wow. Yeah, that's really, really wild. And Florida is a state without a Department of Labor, I learned from your piece, because there's legislation to try to reestablish a state Department of Labor after it was dismantled by Governor Jeb Bush.
Yeah, so I learned about that last year. I'm pretty sure it was last year when I was doing some reporting on wage theft, because the State Department of Labor used to investigate those things. But because Florida no longer has a State Department of Labor, there is some sort of like economic agency. Wage theft is just incredibly widespread, and there's little to no enforcement because that goes through the Florida Attorney General, who, as far as a couple of policy experts I've talked to, they say that they don't really enforce it. And then the other option is to go to the federal government. But the federal government, the DOL, can only enforce the federal minimum wage, which is a lot lower than Florida's. So that's a huge issue. But yeah, so there's been a legislation the past couple of years by, I think, the same couple people. There's actually a local Senator, Victor Torres, who's a current dues-paying union member, who has proposed legislation over the past couple of years to reestablish a State Department of Labor. And there's also a House equivalent as well. But of course, that legislation is languishing because we don't need anything like that. We don't need wage theft enforcement or minimum wage enforcement at all.
Of course, of course. McKenna Shueler, reporter for the Orlando Weekly, thank you for taking the time to talk to us. Is there anything else that folks ought to know about? And if not, where's the best place for folks to find you?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot of bad bills this session targeting public education, faculty, a lot of anti-queer, anti-trans bills, which intersect with labor rights. I've been trying to do reporting on that, but there's a lot of good reporters in Florida that are trying to keep on this. As far as my reporting, you can find me and my work at orlandoweekly.com, and I'm on Twitter way too often at @SheCarriesOn. So thank you so much for inviting me on. I'm so happy to be here, by the way.
Absolutely. Thanks for coming on, McKenna. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
All right. So we've got a couple of things to wrap up with. First off, we're going to talk about this LA school strike really quickly. And it's really exciting because what happened is that SEIU Local 99, which represents around 30,000 teachers' aides, bus drivers, custodians, cafeteria workers, and other support staff, they won an average 30% wage increase after a 3-day strike just last week that ended yesterday. And they got a tentative agreement yesterday. So that's, strikes work is kind of the moral of that story. But it's really, really, really cool. The raises are retroactive to 2021.
Nice.
Which is when they began negotiating for this contract when their last contract expires. And that's another example of how, strikes are not something that workers take willy-nilly. In the LA Times, they quoted a, quote, union critic who ran unsuccessfully for State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Lance Christensen. He said, quote, "What happened wasn't a negotiation, it was a hostage exchange." Wow. One need not be cynical to realize that the union used the children of LAUSD to get the deal that they wanted, while the district caved to a fiscally imprudent deal. UTLA is bound to leverage the students for a similar deal soon. And this, the idea, like I said, these raises are retroactive to when the last contract expired in 2021. This has been an ongoing negotiations process, and they just now struck over it. They wanted to do everything that they could before striking, but they left them no other choice. And this is not an issue of, these people making a ridiculous amount of money. Obviously, because, public school support staff don't make a lot of money anywhere. But what happened is from the I think it's KTLA 5, and the Los Angeles Times is where I'm pulling the details from the deal from. But the deal includes a series of retroactive raises going back to 2021, as well as pay bumps this coming July and January that will collectively hike worker pay by about 30%, said Max Arias, executive director of SEIU Local 99. Which is the support staff union. The deal also sets the district's minimum wage at $22.52, provides a one-time $1,000 raise for any worker who was employed in 2020 in appreciation of their work during the COVID-19 pandemic, and creates a $3 million educational and professional development fund for union members.
Nice.
District Superintendent Alberto Carvalho said at a news conference. The general raises include retroactive payments employed at the time, 6% as of July 1st, 2021, 7% more as of July 1st, 2022, and 7% more as of July 1st, 2023. So they, really great. It also includes guarantees health benefits for all workers and their families if the employees work at least 4 hours a day, and some workers will get increased hours that they said that they needed. So, a really good kind of, common sense stuff. 22 an hour. I honestly, I kind of question if that's enough for, a full-time person working in LA. I mean, I don't know.
Cost of living there is just extreme. Yeah. So you gotta factor that in when you think about, 30%, that sounds pretty large, but they're struggling to make ends meet. And I think, in so many of these big cities like LA, and even, as McKenna was talking about with parts of Central Florida, the workers are struggling to be able to afford to live in the communities in which they work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And, I know this, you quoted this anti-union guy who ran for state superintendent. I mean, I can just tell you as a former educator that no educator makes the decision to be away from their students lightly. It's something that's taken very seriously. And if you don't want to see a strike, the school district can resolve that.
Yep.
It's not that hard. What happens is they get recalcitrant and they want to fight back, and they don't want to make any concessions, and they don't want to pay people what they deserve or treat people the way they need to be treated. But it's very easy to avoid those strikes for school districts. And, it's unfortunate that one of the common talking points is, it hurts the children. It hurts the children.
Right.
The children. Well, what also hurts the children is when you have staffing shortages.
Right.
What also hurts the children is when you don't have qualified professionals there to serve them.
Right.
And on and on. So it's not something that the education unions do lightly. And when they go on strike, they are striking for their students. They are striking for their students, for their schools, for the families and communities served by those schools. It's not just about them. It's really a bigger picture issue. And I always get disgusted when you see those talking points, because a lot of times in these care-based professions, which are predominantly female professions,
Hmm.
like nurses and teachers, other educators, it's used as leverage against them that, oh, you can't strike because what about the children? You can't strike. What about the patients?
Right.
And, it's just not right, because these workers have a right to protest. They have a right to strike. They have a right to fight for what they deserve. And I think in most cases, what you find is that the families understand it and support the educators. Despite how much media and how much anti-union folks try to pit the community versus the educators, most of the time the community gets it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was the case here, where even though, freaks like this Christensen is talking about, oh, they use the kids as hostage, parents joined these folks on the picket line.
Right.
And parents were supportive. I haven't seen in the coverage of this any parents being quoted as being against this strike, which of course there are some, but the fact that, they're not being put forward in the media is it tells you that there's not very many of these folks out there, right?
Right.
And also it's important to note that the strike was not just done by the support staff. It was also they were also accompanied on the picket line by the UTLA, the Teachers Union of Los Angeles, which made the strike effective, and the schools did have to be shut down for 3 days.
Right.
Which shows you, that there's power in numbers, right?
There's power in solidarity.
Whereas if the, if just the support staff had struck and the teachers crossed the picket line, then, it may have been more difficult for them to get what they needed. But because the teachers showed solidarity with them, they were able to, get what they were asking for, get more of what they were asking for, which is, again, not unreasonable stuff. Very, very reasonable. And I was just thinking about the cost of living. These people have their minimum wage set now at $22 an hour. We just talked about an hour ago how bus drivers in Madison City make $23 an hour. Right? So this is, so it's really not, it's not a bankrupting kind of deal that like this guy is trying to make you think. So and that's Madison City school bus drivers in Alabama without a union, right? So, the idea that the LA Unified School District shouldn't be paying their support staff as much as non-union school bus drivers make in Alabama is pretty wild.
Right. And let's not act like Los Angeles doesn't have the money. I mean, there's so much wealth in that city. They can afford to fund schools appropriately and fund the staff appropriately. No question about it. But I'm glad you mentioned the teachers joining in. That was huge. And that's what you need to see. And, to any educators listening, don't let that lesson be lost on you, because a lot of times teachers, custodians, cafeteria workers, they all kind of get in their own little worlds, and they all have their own specific issues, and sometimes there's tensions between these groups inside the schools. But ultimately, you're all there for the kids. You're all there to make the school successful, and you're all facing similar struggles, and you're all reporting to bosses. So that is where, and by helping each other, you can be so much more effective, because ultimately, the more effective each group is, the more effective the entirety of the school is, because you all depend on each other.
Absolutely. William Teamster from California says in the chat, they didn't use children. What a bunch of crap. They improved the lives of the community. Absolutely true. He said on his way to work, I passed by 3 SEIU Local 99 picket lines. It was a joyous scene when they saw a Teamster on their side. Great to see. And he also agrees that, $22 an hour is really even still not enough. You got to make over $100,000 to live in LA. And that LA, speaking to the point of, do they have enough money? LA is one of the richest cities in the country, and the fourth largest economy in the world.
Ooh.
So, yeah.
So they can afford it. They can do it. Happy to see this victory. Direct action can get the goods, And, I'm not super familiar with the SEIU local. I know UTLA in recent years has been much more militant, and they've, had kind of a democratic revitalization of the union. So, that's just promising. And I think what you see is that teachers and support staff across the country are going to pay attention to this.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of education, Adam, you had an update on this Rocket City Reckoning story that we're following, and we're going to have more and a lot more in depth on next week. But you had something of a small update for us this week.
Yeah, so I wanted to update folks a little bit. Last week we brought attention to a new effort called Rocket City Reckoning. It's a website, rocketcityreckoning.com. And there are explosive allegations against Huntsville City Schools and its leadership. That includes allegations of sexual abuse and physical abuse being covered up, allegations of corruption and profiteering and misuse of funds, allegations of all kinds of mismanagement and the creation of a toxic and hostile work environment. It's pretty deep. There's a lot. There's a lot there. And a couple of updates. I did sit down and interview Dr. O'Brien, who is the main person behind Rocket City Reckoning. He is a local education professor. And if you didn't catch the segment last week, long story short, this is a man who volunteered. He volunteered to be on the school district's official desegregation advisory committee, which is part of a court order. And so he wanted to help out. He knew, there were some issues with the school system, and he was trying to help. And through that role, he continually uncovered more and more and more just disturbing incidents, disturbing evidence. And he, went to the district. He talked to the district's lawyers, the superintendent, board members. He went through all the proper channels, and it was clear they didn't want to work with him. He went to the local press, and the local press has pretty much ghosted him. And I think that's a sad reflection on our local press, frankly, because there's enough smoke there to be able to find some fires. I can't speak to 100% of the allegations on that website. I don't want to be irresponsible and do that. But what I can tell you is there's enough smoke there to be concerned about real fires. And it's serious enough to warrant attention. And so I am disappointed, though not surprised, that local media has yet to pick up on any of it. Just this past week, the Rocket City Reckoning folks held a protest at Chapman Middle School, actually pretty close to the studio here in Huntsville. And the biggest update to Huntsville City Schools, though, is that just yesterday evening, Christy Finley, the superintendent for the past 5 years, has announced her retirement at the end of the school year. It's interesting timing. Can we say why she retired necessarily? I don't know. Does it have anything to do with these allegations that are leaking out about her leadership and her school system? I don't know. Could just be a coincidence. I'll have more to say on that, frankly, with some time, because I did work on the other side of the table from Christy Finley for some time. I'm pretty familiar with her leadership, or lack thereof. And so, I probably will have a little something more formal to say about that and the state of the school system and what I hope to see moving forward in the future. As I said last week, on this show, we're always going to support public schools. We're always going to support public education, especially from those outside threats, the privatization crowd, the corporate school reform crowd, the charter and voucher and school choice crowd. We're always going to protect public education from them and advocate for public education. But we recognize public education has its flaws, right? and it has its inequities. And unfortunately, public schools have, like any institution that is run by humans, there are some bad humans inside them. There are bullies, there are crooks, there are narcissists, there are profiteers. And too many of our school districts across the state and across the country, those people have gained power. They have worked their way up the ranks. They have stepped up the ladder and, with no concern for who they stepped on, moving up that ladder. And I think it's very important that folks are engaged in their local schools, in their local community school, the school district in their community, and in their state, because ultimately they are for the public. They're not for contractors to make a buck. They are not just, part of the PR machine of a city establishment. They're there to educate children, to serve our families and our community. They're supposed to be there to strengthen our democracy. So Huntsville City Schools is going through some changes now, with the superintendent announcing her retirement at the end of the year. And this is an opportunity. It's an opportunity for them to do better. Because for too long in that school district, it has been sabotaged from the inside out. And in 2016, we had another opportunity. And unfortunately, it was not as successful as it needed to be. In 2016, Casey Rudinsky resigned in disgrace amid scandal. And 2 board members, 2 former educators, 2 strong women were elected. And so the board was changed. But unfortunately, it was 2 out of 5. That's a minority. And what happened was, when we should have had a cleaning of the house, when we should have had a clear regime change and revitalized the school system from the bottom up in a democratic fashion that engaged the public, that did not happen. Not to the extent that it should have. And so these issues that have been simmering for, over a decade now continue. And that's why they have one of the worst teacher retention rates in the state. A city, the biggest city in the state, a city of such wealth and potential. Huntsville put a man on the moon, can't keep a teacher in the classroom. It's sad. And it could be better. And it should be better, because we all deserve better. So we'll see. Stay tuned. Stay tuned to the developments. We did speak with Jason from Rocket City Reckoning, and it was quite an interview, let me tell you. And it's going to take us a little bit of time because we want to handle it appropriately. Unfortunately, it shouldn't be up to a couple of union guys with a talk show to do that kind of journalism. There are all these folks who are supposed to be in local media and in state media, who are supposed to be investigative journalists. And I would really encourage them to take a look, because there's a lot of allegations, and there are recordings, and there are videos, and there are eyewitness testimonies. And like I said, I can't vouch for everything, nor would I. That's not my place. But certainly, as someone who taught in the system for 3 years, and who spent over 5 years representing the employees in the system, I saw the dark underbelly of the system, and I'm pretty familiar with it. So, as I said, there's a lot of smoke there. There are some fires there. And I encourage our local media to address it. When there are protests at a school, you should probably ask why. I'm just saying. And so, wanted to give folks that brief update. So stay tuned. Like I said, I encourage folks to check out Rocket City Reckoning on Facebook or rocketcityreckoning.com to see what you make of it and come to your own conclusions.
Yeah, and lastly, we've got this quick hit about 10 workers in Birmingham walking out in solidarity with their union brothers and sisters in New York City, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. These are workers for Hearst magazines. They unionized in 2020 with the Writers Guild of America East, and they still do not have a first union contract.
Wow.
So 3 years later, 3 years nearly after their union election, and their employer still hasn't given them a fair contract. Really pretty gross stuff. So the union said that this walkout was to show the company that, we're serious about this. We're serious about getting a fair contract, and you need to take us seriously. The union told Deadline that they're seeking, quote, fair wage increases, better severance, and strong anti-harassment protections, among other demands. So they're not being super clear about exactly what the what the tension is at the bargaining table, but, there's some ideas about some of the issues there. William Thornton for Alabama.com, for AL.com, spoke to Chris Michelle, a union bargaining representative in Alabama. He said about 20 people took part in the Birmingham walkout. He is the senior food and garden editor at Country Living. And he said Country Living and Veranda Magazine employees in Birmingham were involved. He is quoted in the AL.com piece as saying, "We voted in 2020 to unionize, and we've been at the negotiating table since then trying to get a contract, and we've not been able to come to an agreement. We've been negotiating in good faith, and management has repeatedly shown that they are not taking us seriously. The walkout is our attempt to make clear to management that the employees are really serious about having a fair contract." So all the love and solidarity to those folks down in Birmingham and the rest of the country working for Hearst Magazine and trying to get a fair contract. Looking forward to reporting soon about their victory.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Hope so, and glad to see some direct action here in Alabama. And thanks to William Thornton for covering it.
Yeah.
I know I'm hard on the Alabama media, so I'll say thank you when you do the right thing, and I appreciate William Thornton for that article.
Yep. Absolutely. And with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap up, folks. We appreciate your time.
Yeah.
Just a reminder, sign up for our daily or weekly newsletter. Just make a note of which one you wanted to be added to at tvlr.fm/contact. You can also let us know through that if you would be interested in having us speak at your local union meeting about potentially sponsoring the show, your union sponsoring the show, or speaking at a union convention, something like that. You can donate yourself at tvlr.fm/donate, become a recurring donor, or patreon.com/The Valley Labor Report. We have some merch on our website, tvlr.fm/store, that you can get if you want something a little more material for your money. I understand that. And so we want to make provision for that as well. And with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap. Appreciate everybody's time, and we will see you on Thursday with the next episode of Shop Talk, and on Saturday with a brand new episode of The Valley Labor Report.
Solidarity, y'all.